Are we ready to go, Malin?
Already.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for attending today's webinar. We are excited to present you our third webinar, Equity in Health and Aging, as part of our webinar series on bringing communities together around brain health and aging, hosted by the Social Planning Council of Ottawa. My name is Sybil Braganza, coordinator of the Ethnocultural Seniors Program at the Social Planning Council. Before we begin, I would like to thank our funders, the Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation, Ontario Trillium Foundation, and New Horizons for Seniors Program. Thank you again for making this possible. Today's webinar is a professional development opportunity for service providers, organizations, and planners who are concerned with building inclusive environments and advancing systemic change, particularly with policies, programs, and infrastructure in support of healthy aging for ethnocultural seniors living with dementia. The agenda will start off with a presentation from Ngozi and Iroanyah. We will have a break for questions throughout the presentation, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on. Just a few housekeeping rules. Please mute yourself. The mute button is on the lower left corner of the screen. If you have any questions for our keynote speaker, you can type them in the chat box, and please direct them to me, Sybil Braganza with an S. All of the webinars will be taped and will be downloaded on our website, which is Ottawa Community Partnership for Health Equity. Associated resources will also be posted on our website. Going forward, webinars will be held every Tuesday for the next 4 weeks from 10 to 11:30. You can check our schedule for the webinars or sign up to receive them on email. Thank you once again for attending. So I'm very, very pleased to introduce you to Ngozi Iroanyah. Ngozi is a third-year PhD student in the Department of Health Policy and Equity Studies at York University. Her research centers on the experiences of racialized immigrant seniors with dementia, health policy, and services. Ngozi has a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in political science, where she discovered how political determinants of health also contribute to health inequities and poor health status. Her interests include social justice, community development, health policy, health systems change, and health equity for marginalized groups, seniors care, global health, and maternal health. So Ngozi has provided me a very short, brief introduction, but she has lots to share with us. So please join me in welcoming Ngozi. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I don't know if I can see you. There we go. Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me. Sybil, thank you so much to your organization. I'm very humbled to be presenting this information. I'm also very excited to be presenting this information. I hope it's very informative for people, and I hope that people can take things away from this presentation. Just as a disclaimer, if you see me looking down, I'm going to be looking at my phone. I just had a family surgery this morning, and so I'm just making sure that everyone's okay. So I'll be looking down from time to time, and just as a disclaimer. And today I'm going to be talking to you about equity in health and aging, and I'm going to be talking to you about the importance of equity in health and aging. I want to start off by saying that I like to have very inclusive and very safe conversations with people regarding this topic. So as Sybil has mentioned, I will be stopping periodically to let anyone have questions or comments for me, to have a bit of interaction. I like interactive kind of presentations. I know sitting for an hour, hour and a half can be very challenging, even for me. So having some time for a break for people to ask questions or get a cup of coffee or tea or stretch or what have you I know will be helpful. So I'm going to jump right in here. Forgive me, I want to say I'm new to technology, but I shouldn't be. Okay, so I want to set the objectives for the presentation. So next slide, please, Marilyn. So the objectives for today's webinar, we're going to be looking at Canada's new reality. So what Canada looks like now, what it has been looking like since 2011 and 16, and how that actually ties into dementia and seniors' health at large. We're going to be talking a little bit about the numbers on dementia, what these numbers look like, what they represent for us. I'm going to be talking about the research of dementia for culturally, ethnically diverse immigrant seniors, and sort of my research regarding that, which was in the form of a scoping review. Then I'm going to be talking a little bit about health equity in dementia and dementia care and what that looks like, and then a bit of an introduction into intersectionality in health. This bit of an introduction is going to lend itself to my presentation next week, where I talk about an intersectional analysis of the Ontario Dementia Strategy, which is more of an applicable way of using everything that we talked about today and applying it to something real time that's going to have actual outcomes for people. So I just wanted to begin with that, and thank you, Eamon, for the next slide. So first off, let's talk about sort of Canada's new reality. Let's talk about the numbers here. So 2016 was our last Canadian census. Next year actually is our next census, but 2016 was the last one, and it was a very significant census. In 2016, we saw a lot of firsts. One of those firsts was that people aged 65 and older had actually outpaced or outnumbered those 0 to 14-year-olds. And that's 5.9 million people 65 and older to 5.8 million of those 0 to 14. Now, the discrepancy in the numbers may not seem like a lot, but when you take into account the growth rate for these two groups. So since 2011, the last census we had before 2016, there was a 20% increase in the senior population across Canada. So those 65 years and older, they saw a 20% increase in people who were recording themselves as 65 and plus. Conversely, 0 to 14-year-olds, their population increased by 4.1%. So a big significance there. People who were 15 to 64 years old, so that medium group, they only increased by 2.2% since 2011. Now, this holds a lot of implications. So what we're seeing is older populations, the cohort growing a lot more than those after them. What that means in terms of supporting our seniors in Canada, how does that look like in terms of social supports, healthcare related needs, economic housing related needs, all these determinants of health. If we have this growing population of those who are living longer and living with sometimes more health conditions and sometimes not, hopefully not, but how do we best support them? And I put here those 85 plus as a fast growing group of seniors. And I did this purposely because there is something that we need to attend to. So 85-year-olds are a fast growing population. They actually increased by 19.4% since 2011. Compared to 5% of the total population. So that's like a threefold in people 85 years and older. Now, when we think about baby boomers are born between 1946 and 1965. Those who were born in 1946, they actually reached 65 years old in 2011, and they're going to reach 85 years old by 2031. The youngest baby boomers born in 1965, they're going to reach 85 by 2051. So basically what I'm saying is within the next 20 to 30 years, we're going to see a very, very big increase in those who are 85 years and older. And this has significant implications when we talk about dementia numbers, as we will in just one moment. Next slide, please. So in addition to an aging population is sort of being seen for the first time in Canada, we're also thinking about immigration trends as well. And the immigration trends in Canada have steadily been going up over the years, but one thing that we noticed were sort of where people are coming from. But first off, immigration numbers. 1 in 5 people in Canada identify as being foreign born. So that's about 21.9% of the population in Canada acknowledging they were not born in Canada. And so between 2011 to 2016, between the last census, this was about 3.5% of the total population. So in 2011, it was about 1.16 million. In 2016, it's 1.2 million. So we're seeing a steady increase. Interestingly, though, this was the second largest immigration trend in Canadian history following the trends of 1921. So 2016, between those 5 years, 11 and 16, we saw the second largest immigration trend. That holds a lot of significance when we think about social planning and policies and programming to support our immigrant population. So by 2036, we're anticipating that immigration trends are going to be by 24.5 to 30%. So about almost a quarter to a third of the population of Canada is going to be foreign born. So that's something to consider as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. So also thinking about, when we think about these immigration trends, it's thinking about where people are coming from. So as most of you might know, traditionally, immigration trends to Canada have largely been from Europe, Western Europe, Eastern Europe. But in the last census, Asian countries were the highest source of new immigrants to Canada, as were African nations, which incidentally was the second largest source continent after Europe, which is, again, another first for our immigration trends. So this actually led to 22.3%, or sorry, excuse me, the 21.9% as being foreign born in 2016. Now, it also saw in 2016, 22.3% identified as visible minority of the Canadian public, or Canadian population. So we have about 22% saying that they are foreign born, and also 22.3% identifying as visible minorities. Those are not the same, as we know. You can be foreign born and not be a visible minority. You can be a visible minority but being born here on Canadian soil. But when we think about sort of diversification of our Canadian landscape, that's something to consider. I also wanted to point out that immigration trends concerning those 65 and older are also increasing. So between 2011 and 2016, there was a higher rate of people, 65 and plus, coming into Canada. So between 2006, way back when, not way back when, but between 2006 and 2011, people 65 and over were only 3.3%. Between 2011 and 2016, that's increased to 4.6%. It may not sound like a lot, but in terms of numbers and support services, it is. And so as we think about immigration trends continuing forward, we think about immigration policies for Canada, family reunification policies in Canada. We're thinking about how we might be seeing more people 65 and older entering into Canada. Usually, immigration is for, I want to say, the working age of people and families, but now we're seeing that shifting slightly as well. Next slide, please. And so I also wanted to look at Ontario. Ontario is the biggest province in Canada, where a lot of immigrants come, and a lot of the most popular province in Canada as well. So I wanted to look at sort of what the numbers were saying for that. So as you see, in Ontario, it's following the same trends as in Canada as a whole. Those who are 65 and older are outpacing, again, those 0 to 14-year-olds. And so the prediction is that by 2046, we're going to have almost twice as many of those who are 65 and older than those who are 0 to 15. Now, in the landscape of everything, you know, those 15 to 64-year-olds, it's still overwhelmingly more than those who are 65 and older, and those who are 0 to 14. But when we think about changing rates and just population rates and demographics, it's still something to be considered, that we have this aging population that we need to be thinking about. Next slide, please. Thank you. Again, with Ontario as well, similar to Canada, Ontario has a very diversified population. In Ontario, we have about 29.1% who identify as foreign born. The immigration period between the two censuses, 2011 and 2016, contributed to 3.6% of Ontario's total population. So there was a lot of people coming into Canada, and thus coming into Ontario as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so when we think about a country of birth for foreign-born Ontario, and we see the changes here as well. So we see that between 2011 and prior to 2011, sorry, there was a lot of Asian immigrants, newcomers, and compared that to Europeans. When we look at 2011 to 2016, we're seeing the change in demographic. We're seeing that there's more Asians, or those from Asian countries, African countries are increasing, European countries are decreasing, and the other countries are sort of staying the same. But again, this lends itself to being more of a diversified province than we've ever had before. Next slide, please. Provincial distribution of immigrants to Canada. So prior to 2011, Ontario was the biggest province for people to want to immigrate to. That's been changing since 2011 and 2016, and I anticipate it's going to change a lot more as well, as people looking to settle in different parts of Canada for different work opportunities, maybe different pathways to immigration and permanent residency status. Other provinces are also offering those opportunities. So what that means is that we're having a more diversified country, and these other provinces as well are thinking about ways in which to accommodate these new realities that they're also experiencing and going to keep on experiencing. Next slide, please. Thank you. So again, this is a graph of the visible minorities in Ontario. Visible minorities, again, are not synonymous with immigrants. I'm a visible minority, but I'm not an immigrant to Canada. And so when we think about the visible minorities in Ontario, some of these visible minorities, first, second, third generation Canadian, and ascribing to Canadian culture, value, norms, and traditions, absolutely, but also attending to cultural and traditions that come from their parents' country of birth as well. So that's something that I was pondering when I was doing my research about how do you account for those who might be first and second generation Canadian, but still are having, holding on to cultural traditions from their source country, and how does that attend to their health status? Next slide, please. Thank you. So talking about dementia. So I'm building a case. I hope we're saying I'm building a case for my research and giving the backdrop for sort of what my research takes place in. So thinking about dementia, because common to both immigrant seniors and non-immigrant seniors is age-related health conditions, of which dementia is one. Now, dementia is not synonymous with Alzheimer's. A lot of people think that it is, but it's not. Dementia is actually a collection of symptoms caused by disorders affecting the brain. Among the most common is Alzheimer's, but there's also Lewy bodies disease, Parkinson's, vascular dementia, head trauma, frontotemporal dementia, among others. Also could be a long history of taking medications for things like diabetes or HIV medications as well. So a lot of things can affect the cognitive abilities of the mind and the brain. So I would say dementia is kind of like an umbrella, if you will, and underneath that umbrella are all these conditions that dementia houses. So predominantly though, dementia affects those 65 and older. For that reason, people may characterize it as a disorder that affects the aged normally. That's not true exclusively. Dementia can be diagnosed in people as young as 45, sometimes even in their late 30s, depending upon the cause of the dementia. So it's not exclusively for those 65 and older. So when we think about brain health and how to keep ourselves healthy and what things to look out for as we get older, even up from 30 years old and on, and we think about ways to keep ourselves healthy and keep those around us healthy through brain health. Currently, there are about 564,000 people across Canada living with dementia. 25,000 new cases are diagnosed each year. By 2031, those cases are expected, 2036, excuse me, those cases, 32, those cases expect to increase to 962,000 across the country. Currently in Ontario, it's about 175,000. Now these numbers are estimates, only because sometimes people who are experiencing dementia or their family members have not yet come forward to be diagnosed. And we're going to talk about some of the reasons why that might be in certain communities. Next slide, please. Thank you. So when we think about dementia and we think about the prevalence rates of dementia, and again, so I was talking about the 85-year-olds. So dementia doubles every 5 years for those 65 and older. So between 65 and 69, the prevalence rates are less than 1%. By the time it's 85 years and plus, those prevalence rates jump up to 25%, which means 1 in 4 seniors over 85 may have a diagnosis of dementia. And so when we think back to the slide talking about the population differences, 85-year-olds are on the rise in Canada. And so by 2051, 5.7 million people will be 85 years and older. And so when we think about ways to be proactive in managing their health-related needs, among them dementia could be one, we have to think about and start planning, I would like to say now, or sooner than 2050, to make sure that we're able to best support everyone. So what does all this mean? Next slide, please. Thank you. So what does all this mean? So all this really means we have an increasingly aged, racially and culturally diverse population. And this means that there's going to be unique dementia healthcare needs and different social determinants of health that need to be attended to. It's not all the same, and we'll talk about that when we talk about health equity. So we have to be unique and proactive and truly equitable in policies and programming to be able to attend to these realities and make sure that everybody feels supported, everybody feels seen, and everybody can have health status that is dignified along their dementia journey. Next slide, please. And I'm gonna just take a break here, and I'm gonna open up for questions or comments. I know it's a lot of information that I've just spouted and a lot of numbers for people to take in. So I wanted to take a break here and ask if there are any questions or comments or concerns anybody wants to raise. I'm happy to answer.
Thanks, Ngozi. Just in one of the comments were interesting demographic and numbers. 4.6 million seniors in 2046, more Asians and African nations. And the other one was, you had a slide on South Asian, Chinese, Black, and Filipino. Is there a breakdown on the Black communities and where they come from?
No, there is. I don't have that in this data, but there is. Interestingly, a lot of African nations, we're getting a lot of African nations. Now, when we say immigrants, I want to say immigrants, but there's also refugee populations, undocumented people. So a better catchphrase would be to say newcomers to that.
Okay.
But even when I don't like to say newcomers, because refugee health and immigrant health are very different and they're attended to differently by the government. But in terms of raw numbers, yes, there is a breakdown of African, Black, and Caribbean populations, but I don't have for this research though.
Okay. I don't see any more comments or questions. Somebody has raised their hand, but I guess we're just doing chats.
If they can raise their hand.
Oh yeah, so there is one here. Is there any knowledge of why immigrant sources have switched from Europe to Asia and Africa? That is healthcare?
I'm not an immigration consultant per se, but from what I've seen in my studies, a few things attend to that. There's some family reunification. There's also political and social economic climates in different countries. So between Europe and countries in the global South, basically which country looks better to leave from and to come to. Canada may look better than staying in your home country in the global South. So Europeans may want to stay in their home country. They don't need to come to Canada as they used to after World War II, whereas other countries in the global South may still be looking for economic opportunities, more safety and security, and may want to come to Canada for that. Also, Canada, the government of Canada has a lot of work programs for people. In the Philippines, the domestic work program, they have programs with India and China in terms of student programs as well and work programs. So there are many pathways to coming to Canada, and that's at the higher level of government in terms of what those have been put in place for people to come. But since 1960s, 1970s, we've been seeing this slow trend towards diversification and immigration, because after World War II, Europe was devastated and people looked for opportunity. Global South, people still continue to look for opportunity, and they look towards Canada or Europe to do that. I hope that answers your question.
So here's another question. Why refugee is not like immigrants?
Refugee health is taken care of by the government at the national level, the federal government. Immigrant health is taken care of at the provincial level. And so there's different services provided to refugees and immigrants. And so I focused on immigrants because refugee health is a whole research field.
And just the last comment, Ngozi, before we carry on, the diversity of the origin of newcomers creates a language barrier as dementia affects the command on the second language.
Yes, we will, and I will get into all of that as we move forward into my research.
Okay, great. So we'll
Thank you. So I wanted to focus on this slide here. So that's me, and that's my papa, Felix Iroanyah, who was 82 years young, full of life and vigor. He is in third stage dementia. He was diagnosed in 2008 by his family doctor. And he is really the motivator for me to do all of this. In 2008, I was working in the healthcare system proper in the hospitals, and I worked with his family doctor, and I actually began noticing symptoms of my father going into decline back in the early 90s, early to mid 90s, but by then I didn't really know. But by sort of after in 2006, I want to say, 2005, I noticed it more, and I presented the information to one of the doctors at the hospital, and the doctor said, bring him in. So I brought him in, and we had an assessment, and the doctor told me at work that he thinks, most likely, it seems like he has dementia. And so having worked in the healthcare system and working closely with social workers and the CCAC and family physicians, geriatricians, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, I knew what to do. I knew where to go, who to call, how to start this process, how to start this journey to best support my father and my family members and myself. Now, the navigation of the healthcare system was not a perfect science, and it was certainly not easy all along the way, and it still is very, very challenging and very, very difficult in some respects. But it got me thinking. It got me thinking too, this is what we're experiencing. What are other families going through? What are other people experiencing? And I remember I was in a taxi cab once upon a time in 2010, I believe it was. And I'll never forget this. My taxi cab driver, he was Punjabi, and he said to me, we were talking about families and coming to Canada, and I said, oh, my father has dementia. And the driver said to me, oh, is your father in an adult day program? And I said, well, actually, yes, he is. And he says, yeah, we just took our mom there. It's been so helpful and really helpful. We wouldn't know what to do otherwise. And it really, for me, honed in on, there's so many other groups and so many other communities are experiencing this, and how are they managing, how are they supporting themselves and their loved ones. And so that led me to my research, and that began me thinking about the best ways to figure out these questions. Next slide, please. So my research actually consists of two parts. The first part is actually a scoping review on research of ethnocultural minority seniors, immigrant seniors in Canada, and their experience on the dementia journey. The second part of my research is a policy analysis of the Ontario dementia strategy using an intersectional framework, part of my discussion next week, and I'll talk a little bit about that towards the end. So the scoping review is to really see what is out there, what are people writing about, what they're researching about when it comes to dementia and culturally diverse immigrant seniors. There is research on immigrants, and there's research on immigrant seniors' health, and there's research on immigrants and mental health, and there's research on immigrant seniors and mental health. But ethnoculturally diverse immigrant seniors and dementia, that specificity, I wanted to investigate that, and I wanted to see, as my research question here, what is known about the experience of ethnoculturally diverse immigrant seniors and dementia care services in Canada. So that was sort of where I was leading to. Next slide, please. So the methodology that I used, or sort of the framework I used, was an idealist or constructivist paradigm. So a paradigm is sort of the lens in which you see the world. How do you understand the world? How do you see the world? Do you see the world as ideas and knowledge being fixed, being one way, this is the way it is? Do you see the world as being more fluid? And do you see the world as knowledge and constructions of knowledge being fluid, that there's not one type of knowledge, there's not one type of experience? So I sort of lean towards the constructivist paradigm lens by which I see the world. And I focused on the construction of social reality and the meaning individuals place on events. So for that means centering the person and the person's experience in the research and sort of stemming the research from that experience. And also helping to identify existing multiple realities. So the one construction and the one way of experiencing healthcare, there are many different realities to experience healthcare and dementia care. And so trying to identify those realities and see how we can bring them in when we talk about health equity and health inequities. for that, I was thinking about the interactions people have with social structures. So when I think about my father's interactions and my family's interactions when we were going through the initial stages of the dementia journey and what he was experiencing, and how people were relating to him as an ethno-culturally diverse, racialized immigrant senior, and how he was relating to the healthcare system in the context of dementia, not in the context of primary healthcare needs, not in the context of mental health, but of dementia specifically. And looking at that relationship with the social structures and looking at himself as that person, also for me began to churn a lot of thoughts and ideas about how to find out this information. The framework used was by Arsky and O'Malley, which is a very common and popular framework to use for scoping reviews. And if anybody wants more information about that, I'll be happy to discuss that with them afterwards. Next slide, please. Thank you. So scoping reviews, any type of research literature review, you're looking at databases. I use Google Scholar, PubMed, and New York University Library Systems, where I'm from. And I have to put a caveat to this because a lot of people don't think Google Scholar is perhaps the most academically rigorous. Google Scholar has many peer-reviewed sources there as well. So for any researchers in the audience or any students in the audience, don't be afraid to use Google Scholar. It was very helpful for me and for my colleagues and my mentors as well. I focused on 2008 till 2018, that 10-year gap. I wanted to be relevant and timely in terms of any sort of new research that was being developed and any sort of new government policies and programs that were being developed that could really attend to sort of in coordination with the immigration trends that we had been seeing since 2006. And you'll see here just briefly some of the keywords that I used: seniors, aging, aged, old, elderly. I did look at Alzheimer's, cognitive decline, mental health, memory loss. Now, mental health and dementia, yes, technically is a mental health concern, but it's not treated the way mental health issues are treated conventionally. So mental health, while depression and anxiety can be a symptom of dementia and Alzheimer's, it's different from depression and anxiety in that of itself. So in all of my articles that I looked at, I really wanted to focus on dementia itself, or cognitive decline or memory loss, as opposed to mental health, which encompassed a lot of other issues. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as you see here, common with scoping reviews, you'll start off with a lot of studies that you'll get, and then when you pare it down to what you actually include in your study, it's sometimes a fraction or a small fragment of what you would have looked at initially. And that's because when you go through initially the databases for this type of work, you may see immigrant seniors, mental health issues. You're like, oh, okay, so you'll include that as part of the studies, but then when you go through the abstract and actually read the actual article, it may not be talking about dementia. So from that, 14 were selected for my study. Of the 14, the breakdown is such: 5 were South Asian, 3 were Asian, 2 were both South Asian and Asian, 1 was focused on Latin communities, and 3 were focused on a mix of different racialized immigrant groups. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so what I found when I was going through these articles and I was looking at the research, I had 3 main findings or 3 main themes that I took away. And so for me, these were themes that were repeated throughout the literature. Literature on ethno-culturally diverse immigrant seniors and immigrant seniors and mental health, there was a lot of overlap. Right? So dementia has its own unique challenges and its own unique attention in the healthcare system, but there was in fact some overlap with immigrant seniors and mental health in general. So the first theme that I saw was how culture and language influences the dementia journey. Theme 2 was trust and relationships with health providers and social services. And theme 3 was new theoretical approaches to dementia for immigrant seniors. And I'll go through one by one what each of these mean and the significance of them and how it will actually relate to real time for recommendations. Next slide, please. Perfect, thank you. So within all of the studies, culture and language were cited as main barriers to getting equitable access to dementia care services. Now, when we talk about language and culture, like we talk about languages, you know, someone who's an immigrant senior is not going to speak English, so they're not going to be able to connect with the healthcare provider, the doctor, the nurse, or even the administrator. Someone had mentioned in the comments that people who have dementia, they regress, and they do. People who have dementia, depending upon where along you have dementia, you can lose command of the English language if you're bilingual, and you can resort back to your primary language, your first language that you learned, which can pose even more challenges, especially if you're at a stage where that can be fragmented. So even though you're speaking in your mother tongue, you're speaking in a very fragmented, disordinated, or disjuncted sort of way anyway. Which can be challenging for not just the provider, but for the family member as well, trying to support them. So culture and language, and I want to talk a little bit about language. Another part of language is also health, being able to understand the medical terminology. So even if someone has the command of English language, or not that much, medical terminology can be very challenging in itself to be able to navigate and to interact with. I've worked in the medical field for many, many years, and even myself, I call it, it's a language of its own. I call it Dr. Ease. Dr. Ease. So when doctors say, oh, you have this condition, and they start listing off all of these parameters about the condition. And for a lot of time, you just be standing there thinking, okay, yeah, I don't know what you're saying. I recognize 2 of those words. And hearing a diagnosis like dementia, you know, for some communities, dementia isn't even in their language. So they don't have that. They don't have a word for dementia, Alzheimer's. There's just no word for it. So hearing it in English or in their own language, it's not something that's going to be able to be taken in by some people in some communities. So being mindful of that was what I saw in the literature. Also, dementia has a social and culturally constructed meaning. So for some people, dementia holds a significance that's negative. For other people, other communities, dementia holds a significance that's not, excuse me, that's my phone going. For some other people, other communities, dementia doesn't hold a negative significance, it holds a positive significance or a neutral significance. For some communities though, dementia is seen as a natural part of getting older. So it's not necessarily seen as a negative, as a negative thing. It's just, oh, that's just Auntie in the corner. She's forgetful. It's not a big deal. You know, we don't have to worry about that. And so because of that, because of these cultural differences, there might be a delay in seeking a diagnosis for dementia, especially if those see dementia as something that's just a natural part of aging, which it is not. Dementia is not a natural part of aging, though it predominantly affects people 65 and older. It's not natural for the human condition to go through this, just so we're clear. There's also an association with shame that I saw in the literature, and that I also experienced in my own personal journey, and that of other people that I've spoken to along the way. Shame with having a mental health or a cognitive issue can be very, very powerful, that shame. That shame can lead to isolation. That shame can lead to flat out denial. And that shame can lead to poor coping mechanisms in terms of someone who is experiencing dementia and the family members who are supporting that person. So when my father got diagnosed, I remember a lot of people in my community actually no longer calling, no longer coming by, no longer interacting with him in the same way. And one of the research articles, it said that shame of someone having dementia can also translate to younger generations. So people may look at, you know, in a lot of communities, it's not that it's an arranged marriage, but it's a preconceived marriage for some younger people. And so if there's dementia in the family, all of a sudden those options for marriage may no longer be as attractive, because people may feel like, oh, well, there's something going on with their father or their mother. You know, we should not maybe put our family with that family together. And there can be a sense of exclusion from the community, which can be very painful, very, very painful for people to go through. Also, another issue with culture is looking at family approaches to care can also delay or interrupt treatment and care options. So, excuse me, talking about shame in the family and maladaptive coping mechanisms. So a lot of communities really rely on the family to take care of the elderly and people who are aged and people who have age-related conditions. Excuse me one moment. Excuse me. I apologize. So a lot of families and community members really rely on themselves to take care of their loved ones as they get older. For example, when my father was diagnosed, I knew that we would have to put him at home at some point. He's going to have to go into a nursing home. Not at that right moment, but I knew what dementia would look like as he progressed. So when I began saying that to my aunts and uncles, I remember my aunt actually calling me on the phone and sort of chastising me, saying, we don't put our people in a home. How could you do this to your father? He took care of you kids. You have to take care of him. You have to do this. And that cultural feeling of guilt very much, wasn't lost on me. But because I knew the kind of care my father would need down the line would not be the care that I could give him and my family could give him, I knew that we would have to do what we were going to have to do. But for a lot of families, though, having their loved one at home is really important and paramount for them. But when we think about, again, the demographics that I talked about in the beginning, we have a growing population of those 65 and older. We have an also growing population of those 85 and older. And if there is dementia present within those populations, and we still have 0 to 14-year-olds, even though the rate of increase isn't that much, but it's still growing. So people who are in the sandwich generation, so family members who are caring for smaller children and for those who are older, they're stuck in this in-between stage because the emotional, mental, physical, financial resources to attend to both sides of that could be very exhaustive. And for that, you get caregiver burnout. You get people saying, I can't handle everything. I got to care for my children, and then I look after my in-laws or my parents, and it's just too much. And so thinking about how family plays in with culture to providing dementia care can also be a barrier for those seeking access to it. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this slide is thinking about trust in healthcare providers and healthcare systems and implicit bias. And this was a really important one for me because I really resonated with this when I was looking at it. And so in the studies, patients reported feeling not seen, not being taken seriously, feeling dismissed by their providers. Now, other research has shown us that immigrants and immigrant seniors report lower levels of positive experiences within the healthcare system. Things like culture and language act as barriers, and as well, personal relationships with healthcare providers. There are studies that have shown some healthcare providers are dismissive of immigrant health concerns because they don't feel that maybe they're within the Western conception of what health should be and what health issues should be. And so for immigrant seniors, ethno-culturally diverse immigrant seniors as well with dementia-related needs, there was a fear of not being taken seriously and having providers say, oh, you're fine, it's nothing, you're fine, it's nothing. So when we think about what's happening on the internal, the micro level interaction, well, this is also micro level, but what's happening within the person and within their cultural perspectives of dementia, and then when they present to the healthcare system, what is happening in those interactions, in that relationship, a sense of trust is being eroded. And people can feel like they don't feel really supported by their healthcare provider, and they don't really feel that they should go back to their healthcare provider. To that, some healthcare providers may not be able to feel that they can properly support someone from an ethno-culturally diverse background with dementia, how to best have those conversations, how to best have, speaking to the patient themselves or speaking to the family members. Sometimes they feel like they're not really quite sure on how to do that. I gave a conference last year in Quebec, was it Moncton, Quebec. And I was a poster presentation, and I actually had some health providers come up to me and they say, this cultural piece is really interesting. I have some clients with dementia. How do I get them to understand it's dementia? How do I get them to uptake, what I'm saying to them in terms of treatments and medications and what have you? So some health providers as well feel a sense of, how do I best support them? How can our clinic and our services best support them? And that leads to my second point in theme two, lack of culturally appropriate resources and information about dementia programs and services. And so when you think about it, when someone's being given that diagnosis, say you're a Pakistani grandmother, 79 years old, you just came to Canada maybe 7 years ago, you were an accountant for all this time in Pakistan, you retired, you wanted to spend time with your family in Canada, you come to Canada, you exhibited signs of dementia, you don't really know what this is about, you never had any experience with it back home. Now in Canada, it's the first time really encountering the healthcare system, and someone tells you, you have dementia. Here's a pamphlet on dementia, Alzheimer's Society, bye, we'll see you in a month or two. You're going to walk away from that encounter not really quite sure what just happened and what to do with all of this information. And so having culturally appropriate resources and information about dementia programs and services is also very important. And as well, having culturally appropriate programs themselves. So my father goes to the day program in Peel, and it's such a wonderful program. I drop him off there sometimes, and it's to me it's very lovely to see that. But thinking about what culturally sensitive and culturally aware sort of supports they have built in to their policies and built into their program planning, there's not. And so what you'll have like people who want to attend to the cultural differences of the group, but because it's not built in, it's almost like seen as an ad hoc, like an add-on feature of what they offer to clients, which is wonderful and needed and important. But there's something to be said for having cultural diversity built into the programs as opposed to being added on to a program. And that gets sort of references my intersectionality that I'm going to be talking about. Candidacy was also another feature within the articles, and candidacy is a feature of constant negotiation and gaining access to dementia services. And so by this negotiation, it's sort of a way in which to negotiate with yourself of having dementia and negotiating with the healthcare provider and explaining that you have dementia and their ability to accept that you have dementia, and then your ability to accept it as well when they tell you that they think you have dementia. So a candidacy is a feature of this negotiation process in terms of your relationship with your provider and getting the diagnosis, accepting the diagnosis, getting on the treatment plan and accepting the treatment plan. There was a lot of that I saw in some of the literature, and that again goes back to the barriers of culture, of language, of feelings of trust, of culturally available programs and services, and how that relates itself to being able to gain access throughout. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the last theme that I want to talk about is thematic approaches and challenges to dominant constructions of dementia and dementia care. So we're in Canada, and we abide by the Canadian healthcare system, and we abide by sort of Western constructions of health and when I say Western frameworks, I mean North American, Western Europe framings of health and mental health and dementia. So how we conceive mental health, how we think about dementia, how we think about dementia care, and how we think about who the dementia patient is, it's all been constructed from this perspective of Canadian, American, and European understandings. But from the research, from the literature that I saw, there are ways to challenge that. And so that's a dominant construction that we have, and that's how our healthcare system and our dementia care system has been built. But there's challenges to that just by virtue of having, again, is going back to the demographics, just by virtue of having these different ethnocultural groups coming in, how is dementia conceived in those communities? How is dementia really understood in those communities? And how can we best support people with dementia from those communities? So challenging those notions of dementia, largely dementia seen in the Western world is a very negative thing. Some communities don't see it like that. Some communities see it as something a bit more nuanced. And so thinking about those constructions can help supporting clients. Also thinking about holistic and complex views of personhood as seen as a way forward. Now, what that means is that when we think about ethnoculturally diverse immigrant seniors, in the research and in my own research, when we think about these people, there's a holistic view of them that encompasses multiple social locations and multiple social identities. So they're not just someone who's aged, period, someone who's immigrant background from the Philippines, period, someone who has dementia, period, someone who's been in Canada for 5 years, period. They are all of those identities all in one person. So it's not a person, period, their identities being split up. It's their personhood being conjoined as one. And it's in that sort of simultaneous multiplicity of social identities that make up the whole person. So for example, I'm not just a woman. I'm not just a Black person. I am not just a person, you know, in my age demographic. I am all of those things as one. And all of those things as one particular person is what interacts with the healthcare system. And that's the relationship I have with the healthcare system as all of those identities as one person. If it's a bit sort of out here, I'm going to sort of pare it down as we move forward. But looking at the constructions of dementia and the dementia patient, a lot of these articles were talking about, well, what other ways can we think about mental health and dementia? And what other ways can we think about the supposed dementia patient and how best to support them? So that's sort of the three themes that I was thinking about. Now here, we talk about health equity and we talk about health inequities. I am going to take a little break here and ask if there are any questions. That was a lot of information about my research. If anybody has any questions or comments, please let's have a conversation. Sybil, are there any questions? No?
Muted myself, sorry. So thanks, Ngozi. There are a few comments and a couple of questions.
Wow.
So the first one was, thank you for sharing your story about your dad. It's very inspiring, and your journey with him.
Oh, thank you.
And the second comment is, the sense of exclusion is a reality faced by the ethnocultural seniors, and it's twice a reality for them because of the stigma and guilt of caring for your own.
Yes, it is, absolutely.
And one of the questions that you mentioned, intersectionality, they want to know, what does it mean? And another, yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to talk about intersectionality towards the end of the presentation, because that's the jump off point for next week's presentations. I will talk about that. It is a big concept, yes.
Okay, thank you. And a question really at the beginning was how are we compared to other countries where it's related to dementia care? And I'm not sure if that's something for your next presentation, or you can answer today.
In relation to dementia care, in relation to ethnocultural seniors, or in relation to dementia care as a whole?
No, ethnocultural seniors.
Well, that's sort of the tricky part, and that's sort of one of my final recommendations. We don't have a lot of research. We don't really know. There is some excellent research coming out of different parts of Canada, but when we compare ourselves to the UK, for example, to England, to America, for example, there's a lot of research coming out of those areas about how different cultures are experiencing dementia and dementia journey with their healthcare providers or within their family members. There is information in Canada about ethnoculturally diverse seniors and caregivers and sort of what they have been experiencing from the caregiver perspective. But for the people experiencing dementia on their own journey, that's a research area that's still being developed. And that's what I called to for one of my recommendations, that we absolutely need more research, because we don't know. And what we don't know lends itself to how policies and programs are developed. And what that means is that just more gaps kept being reproduced and more people keep falling through those gaps. So there's a lot more in other countries, a lot more in England, some things coming out of Sweden and Germany, a lot more in the United States, and some things coming out of Australia as well. But Canada's lagging behind.
Thank you, Ngozi. So another question from Erin Fletcher Randall. The idea of candidacy and diagnosis acceptance is fascinating to me, as my research focuses on adults being diagnosed with autism and having their diagnosis rejected by family doctor. Do you have more information or sources for candidacy?
I do, because in the interest of time, because I do have to skedaddle right at 11:30 to tend to my family member. Yeah. In the interest of time, if anybody wants to email me specifically, I'm happy to share my references. There are some wonderful, wonderful research that is happening with candidacy. And it's a very important framing, because we're thinking about this idea of negotiating on a personal level, on an interpersonal level, at a systems level, bigger level, when you get a diagnosis that you're not necessarily familiar with. When we talk about autism, I haven't done extensive research in autism, but when we talk about autism, a lot of families have a hard time accepting autism, and a lot of primary physicians, from what I understand, or pediatricians, from what I understand, they might have some difficulties. When you get that diagnosis, it's a little bit easier But to get that diagnosis, a lot of people are just, nope, no, it's fine, not my child, everything is fine. We're just they'll grow out of it. It's just a phase right now. And so being able to negotiate that sense of difference that you're feeling, experiencing in your family, and to mitigate the shame, sometimes guilt for some parents as well, that's also very important. So please DM me or PM me or contact me, and I'll be happy to share those resources.
Thank you, Inga. Can you take one more question, or should we move on?
I can take one more question.
Okay, just before we move on, everything is going to be taped and uploaded on our website. So I know I'm getting a lot of questions about this being taped and videotaped, so that it will be available in the future. So one of the questions is, beside medication, are there steps that can be taken to slow down the progress of dementia?
Whew, yeah. Oh, if we had an answer for that, I think the whole world would feel a lot better. Brain health, studies have shown taking care of your brain, your physical health is also very important. So exercise, reducing stress, no smoking, monitoring your alcohol intake, healthy eating, healthy living, non-processed foods. This all attends itself to general lifestyle health and wellness, but it also has an effect on the brain. As well, my dad's geriatrician actually told me something very, very interesting that I didn't realize. She said, when we're younger, we need to read to develop our brains. That's how our brains work. When you're a kid, you need to read a lot. They always tell you to read. But when you're older, social networks, talking, engaging with people helps to maintain the cognitive of your brain. So when we think about seniors, sometimes seniors can become very isolated. If they have a spouse that passes away, or their children are busy, or if they don't have children, or sometimes they're a new immigrant to the country and they don't know anybody and they're just by themselves, that isolation can also lend itself to cognitive issues and memory loss. So being able to have social networks and communication and activities, exercising, when you see, I know in the mall, for example, or they used to have in the malls, you would have seniors doing walks around the malls in groups as a way to connect and keep social connection. I remember once I did a seniors water class. It was in the pool in my condo. They had a lesson classes for seniors. There's a whole bunch of senior women, and they were doing their exercises in the water and just getting into it. And this was a long time ago, so I thought, I'm fit, I can keep up with these ladies, I can do it. I almost drowned, and these women were like, oh, let me help you, are you okay? And I felt like I can't keep up with you, and you're like 50 years older than me. So being fit and maintaining that lifestyle of fitness is really good to help slow down the progression of dementia. The research has shown us. I'll go back to the presentation.
Okay, Ngozi, one last question.
Sure,
and then
yeah.
what I'm going to do is, if people have specific questions because of lack of time, email me, and then I can email it to Ngozi and she can respond to you directly.
Yes.
Is there a cause to Canada lagging behind in terms of dementia research? And is it funding? Is it lack of engagement by organization and government leaders?
In terms of ethnocultural groups, the reasons why that is, I'm going to talk a little bit about when I talk about the recommendations. In terms of dementia care in general, we're doing okay. We're leading the pack in some respects. In terms of ethnocultural groups, we're not. Why that is are multifaceted. Some organizations don't have the capacity. Some organizations don't have the wherewithal. And also when you think about dementia, when you think about research in dementia, like I remember when I was in the hospital, I was looking at geriatricians, and there was a geriatrician that I was working there, and she was fairly young. She was like, I think in her at that time, late 20s, early 30s. And I thought to myself, wow, there's a young person who went into medicine to help with seniors' health, as opposed to most people in medicine go into, doing other fields of medicine. And seniors' health isn't something that's not necessarily seen as something that people maybe want to give as much attention to, which is coincidental, because we all have to get old, right? And so it would, even on a selfish point of view, it would behoove us to make sure that we have supports in there when we get to that stage. But for ethnoculturally diverse immigrants, seniors, the reasons for that are many, but looking to change that. There is funding now, especially after COVID, not after COVID's not done yet, but during COVID, there is funding now going to be released for seniors' health and seniors' health issues. And so for any researchers out there who are interested in this topic, you can contact me, we can discuss some things about that, but we need to get more research, that is for sure. Thank you for all your questions and comments. I'm going to continue on, just in the interest of time. So I want to talk a little bit about equity and this picture of equity here. And so some of you may have seen this, some of you may not, but when you see this, this is a picture that describes what equity is. So when we think about equity, people confuse it with equality. People think, well, health equity, health equality, it's all the same. Everyone's going to get health. No, it's not all the same. The picture on the left-hand side is an example of equality. So these three children would like to see the soccer game. These three children were all treated equal in that they were given a box the same height at the same time to be able to watch the game. But they're not able to watch the game in a way that's conducive for them. This fellow here in the blue pants and the red shirt, easy to see the game, no issues, no problem. The young lady here in the green skirt and the pink shirt, she's just tiptoeing, can barely see, can barely enjoy herself. And this individual here in the wheelchair has absolutely no access. Equity and equitable distribution would be that to provide services and resources to people based on need, based on what they need. So the man in the blue, the boy in the person in the blue pants and the red shirt, they don't need anything. They can see just fine. Clearly, they have literally a head over the fence. They're fine. The young lady in the blue and the green skirt and the pink shirt needed 2 boxes to be able to see comfortably. And the person in the wheelchair needed an actual ramp with a step there to be able to see properly over the fence. So this is an example of equity. So distributing resources and services based on need rather than on an equal distribution. So when you see health programs that are saying we want to be equal, we want to have equal opportunity, equal access, equal provisions, and that's wonderful. But if we don't think about the populations who should be accessing them, for example, the best example that was given to me is that, you know, you have a service being offered by a health clinic somewhere on one side of town. On the other side of town are people who want to attend that service. But if the service on, you know, the one side of town's who's offering the services, if it's offered Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 only, you know, with only, you know, certain doctors and certain nurses, with only of this certain health issue in the language of English, you're going to exclude a lot of people. You're going to exclude people that maybe can afford to get to the health clinic. Maybe they can't afford tokens. Maybe they can't afford the $6 or $7 to take the TTC and come back again. Maybe they can't take the time off of work. As we know, a lot of immigrants and immigrant seniors are in precarious employment, so they don't necessarily have a job that allows them the freedom to maneuver and go to health appointments and health clinics at will. So maybe they're not able to get there. If this program is only in English, people may not be able to attend. If the health providers are predominantly male, that may also be an exclusionary factor. So when we think about programs that want to emphasize health equality, to me, to get to health equality, you have to go through health equity first. To me, that's just my own personal take of it. Next slide, please. And so just a definition here, health equity is the absence of disparities in health that are systematically associated with social disadvantage or disadvantage as a whole. And so next slide, please. So from the research we know, recent immigrant seniors have lower health status than their Canadian counterparts and face greater barriers accessing mental health services. This is really important. The healthy immigrant effect, some of you may know, the healthy immigrant effect is that for an immigrant, when they first come to Canada, they tend to be healthier than their Canadian-born counterparts. Then after a period of approximately 10 years, that health begins to decline as acculturation sets in and other systematic issues set in. But recent immigrant seniors actually report having lower health status when they arrive, as opposed to better health status, than their Canadian counterparts. So the baseline starting off is already lower for immigrant seniors. That needs to be taken into consideration when we're looking at seniors' mental health and seniors' dementia health. So policies and programs that incorporate a sense of health equity can help reduce some of these inequities and can help reduce some of these gaps that are seen for people when they try to access dementia care services or services in general. Next slide, please. Solutions. So here are some of the recommendations that I had seen that I've sort of devised as well going through this research. So when we think about research-based and recommendations for research-based, some of the things that I came up with, more targeted research that focuses on the experiences of immigrant seniors, ethnocultural immigrant seniors on the dementia journey. So as I said, there's a lot of research on immigrant seniors and mental health. There's more research on ethno-culturally diverse immigrant seniors and mental health, but not a lot of research on ethno-culturally diverse immigrant seniors and dementia. So that's something that needs to be filled in. That's something that needs to be explored, something that needs to be attended to. Dementia research looking at experiences of different ethno-cultural immigrant groups. So from my study, I saw a lot of information on Asians, South Asians, one on Latinx, which is wonderful, absolutely needed and absolutely essential. But there needs to be more. As we saw, again, from the demographics, we have a very diverse Ontario population and very diverse Canadian population. The question of the breakdown of African, Black, and Caribbean people in Ontario, there's a lot of people from Africa, Caribbean as well, because the proximity to Canada, and Black. People always think that the Black population in Canada is very small or just recent because of immigration since 1960, but there's generational Black people in Canada that's not necessarily shown in the research. Develop community-based research to contextualize dementia and mental health from the perspective of the community. So this lends itself to community-based research or participatory action research at the community level. So devising research with the community at the level of inception. So a lot of times, and research has shown this is not effective, having research that's already done outside the community and then taking it to the community to say, this is what you should be looking at. This is what you should be thinking about. Doesn't necessarily work. The community best knows their needs. And best knows the ways to support their needs. So having research that encompasses that from the get-go is much more important. I also put it here, race-based data collection for health. And I'm gonna just let that hang in a minute. Race-based data collection for health. We don't have that. We do not have that in Ontario. We barely have that in Canada. There are some pockets that do that. There are some researchers that do that, but as a whole, it is very, very difficult to get race-based data collection for health. Now, the impetus behind that, many people would say, oh, it causes divisions and we don't think about people that way, or they say health is very objective, there's no bias in health and medicine and science, you know, everyone's treated the same. That is not true. That is categorically not true. And if we go under the auspice that, you know, we can be colorblind or culture blind or color neutral or culturally neutral, we're going to reproduce these inequities. We're going to reproduce these feelings of social exclusion. Not, I don't say that anybody means to do it, but to pretend that everybody is treated the same in healthcare is very erroneous and in some cases dangerous. And so for that, race-based data collection for health is absolutely essential and needed. I think because of COVID, there has been some more talk and some more race-based collection data, how COVID is impacting different communities, which is excellent and wonderful, because then we can begin to track what is happening in different communities, because if we don't know, we can't support anyone. So that's very important. And then immigration status-based data collection for health. So we do have some of that already, but as it attends to ethnocultural groups, we don't. And that's another area that I was thinking about in terms of research-based recommendations. Next slide, please. So community-based organizations. So recommendations for community-based organizations. Community engagement and outreach that's culturally relevant and culturally sensitive. So when community-based organizations want to go into communities themselves to deliver some sort of health development or health literacy project, finding ways that the community that they want to engage with is going to be able to uptake, to engage, to buy into what they're doing. So having promotions and having strategies that are culturally relevant and culturally sensitive. And you would think that a community-based organization working within a community would inherently do that. They don't. Some community-based organizations are not able to have that level of connection, or not able to have that level of understanding or awareness of what happens within those communities that they're serving. So that relevancy and sensitivity piece is also very important. Health promotion to reduce stigma and increase awareness is essential. So thinking about dementia as being part of aging is something that needs to be attended to in a culturally relevant way for people, so they can begin to look for signs and symptoms. One is partnerships with other community-based organizations, dementia and health services, and immigration services is important to build trust and mutual exchange. Now, this is really important and something that I don't know that many people think about. A lot of community-based organizations, dementia services, health clinics, health organizations operate in silos. Everybody's sort of responsible for their own thing. rightfully so. Everyone's very busy. They have a lot of work to do. It's not possible to know about every single organization who is doing what and when. But when you think about your client base, immigrant services, they get clients from all over the world, people looking for housing, for healthcare, for education needs, etc. But so if someone comes to an immigration service and they say, you know what, I'm experiencing this, I have some issues, I keep forgetting things, I'm having mood disorders, etc. The immigration services might be able to connect them with a dementia-related service, right? But if they don't know, if they don't have that partnership, a gap has been created. And the client is the one to suffer through that gap. And so creating these partnerships, thinking about these partnerships in ways that you can have a mutual exchange, because it benefits both people. So the dementia care services might not have a partnership or a relationship with the community, with the diverse community. So being able to establish a connection, being able to establish a partnership will help benefit both people in terms of knowledge sharing, experience sharing, and better support the client base that's coming through their doors. So that's something that I was thinking about and that I saw in the literature. Next slide, please. Just looking at the time here. Okay, healthcare providers. This is a big one here. So I talked about, my experience in having some healthcare providers approach me and talk about their experiences with their ethnoculturally diverse patients and their clients and family members. So, and I'm always sensitive when I talk about recommendations for healthcare providers because I know the realities. Healthcare providers, they're busy, they're stressed out, they're overworked, they have a lot going on. They're learning more things. And if you look at sort of the nature of the healthcare system itself, the kind of work and responsibilities that nurses have, that PSWs have, it has changed over the past 20 years. The kind of responsibilities that primary health physicians have has also changed over the past 20, 30 years. So it's something to be considerate of when you say, oh, just give them more training, they just need to learn more. They're busy, they have a lot to learn already. But providing training that is culturally competent in dementia care, how dementia might be conceptualized by families and clients and communities and family dynamics, it's still very important because these are the clients that you're going to be seeing. These are the people that you're going to be seeing. And having blind spots of not knowing how, dementia could be conceived in different communities, or having blind spots about family dynamics, families that really want to support their loved ones at home at all costs. All of these things not only helps the patient feel more seen and accepted, but it also helps the provider feel more competent and confident in providing these services. Again, it's not expected and it's not realistic to know every single cultural perspective of dementia, but there are some certain cultural trainings that can be offered to people to have a little bit more cultural awareness and sensitivity. Use of best practices may be needed to include cultural perspectives to inform how information is delivered or received. Again, going back to my example of telling the 79-year-old Pakistani woman, you have dementia, here's a pamphlet, see you in a month or 3. That's, that can be overwhelming and daunting, and it may not do much for her. She'll just be like, I don't know what you're saying or what's happening. I'm going to put it in my purse. My kids will deal with it one day. I'm not going to deal with it. So finding a way to deliver information that is relevant and safe can also help the information be received. Trust building with clients and their families. Again, healthcare providers have limited time for a visit. They don't have 20 minutes, half an hour to sit and go through everything deeply and ingrained. That's why you have social workers. That's why you have other social providers to support. But also finding ways to build those relationships of trust are important. Increased coordination and knowledge of immigrant services, cultural community centers, or culturally appropriate social workers programs and services. Again, not realistic to know every single community-based organization in your catchment area. It's not going to happen. But having some knowledge of 1 or 2 might be helpful. Having some knowledge of a hub might be helpful. If you work in a clinic and you have maybe pamphlets from other community organizations there, might be helpful. These are just some small ways to make the experience of both those experiencing the dementia journey and those providing support on the dementia journey just a little bit easier and a little bit more inclusive. Next slide, please. Dementia care and healthcare providers. Okay, so there's some overlap here, as you'll see. So dementia care and healthcare providers building relationships with local community organizations and immigrant services also helps to give them an expanded view of dementia, right? So if you're connecting, as if you're a dementia care provider and you're connecting with a community-based organization or members of the community, you get to see and understand how dementia is seen and experienced by other groups, which will help enhance or inform some of your own services and programs that you offer to people, and education materials as well. Flexibility in programs to include diverse experiences and understandings of dementia. So again, I'm talking about, as my example about equality versus equity, having flexibility in the hours of the programs, location, delivery models of programs. So telling people from ethno-culturally diverse backgrounds, okay, we're having a workshop only on Tuesday and Wednesday, 9 to 5 on the other side of town, in English with computers. Bring your smartphone or your tablet. That's not going to be conducive for a lot of people to show up. So finding ways that speak to the needs and the realities of the clients and the communities that you're working with is important. Community outreach that's tailored to and culturally relevant to community needs. Staffing solutions. This is very important. Staffing solutions, but not tokenism. So, and this is the example I always use to people. If you had an organization or a program that's going to service women, that's going to service women's reproductive needs or changing needs of their life course or what have you, it would behoove that program and that institution to have female staff. It makes sense. Same with ethnocultural immigrant seniors and services that support them. Having a staff that is representative truly of the population that you serve really does help. Studies have shown it really does help in decreasing anxiety. It helps in feeling included. It helps in establishing trust. Now, I'm not saying that, instead of just hiring somebody from that group and sticking them somewhere. And I'm not saying, affirmative action, we have to bring people on. Obviously, there's a screening process and there's, who's best suited for the job, etc. But keeping in mind of things like implicit bias, keeping in mind things that, you may not see or attend to in ways of making sure that your organization and the programs that you support and the programs that you put out are really reflective of the staff member, of the community that you serve. I didn't talk about implicit bias. I'll mention it here. Implicit bias are sort of preconceived notions that you have or a group or of people that you operate on subconsciously. So, you may think about a certain group in a certain way based on experiences or based on knowledge you may have heard previously that you may have tucked away somewhere in the back of your mind that you may operate on and not even be aware of. So when we talk about dominant structures and dominant constructions of dementia, and when you meet someone who's from a different ethnocultural background who's like, I don't understand what you're talking about. What is dementia? What do you memory? I don't understand what you're saying. An implicit bias may be like, oh, those people from that background, they just don't get it. They're not up to, they're not as smart, or they don't. You sort of position them in a way that's less than you might, because maybe you're familiar with more Western conceptions of dementia, and because this person isn't, you create this sort of hierarchy. And that's sort of where implicit bias can sort of be seen in terms of dementia care and health equity. And so these are things to think about. At the end of the day, though, individualized approaches to working with diverse groups is also very important. As someone once said to me, when you meet someone with dementia, you meet someone with dementia. They're not all the same. Everyone is very different. And so while there are broad themes to be considered of, it's also important to keep in mind that everybody is an individual when it comes to dementia, and finding ways to best support individuals and individual families is very important. Next slide, please. So next week, I'm going to be talking about my work on the Ontario Dementia Strategy and an analysis with intersectionality-based approach. So intersectionality is a framework to understand the multiple and simultaneous social identities that make up an individual. So if you look at the icon to the left, you see down the middle intersectionality, and you see all of these sorts of racism, classism, sexism, colonialism, ableism, heterosexism, and there's more, all coalesce together. So again, as I said, I'm not just a woman, I'm not just a Black person, I'm not just a person of a certain age, I am all of those things in one. And this way of looking at me is an intersectional framework. And so the way the social systems in our society, education system, healthcare system, housing system, they are going to relate to me as all of those things in one, not just as a woman, not just as a Black person, not just as a person of a certain age, but all three in one. And there are other identities as well that make up each person. So intersectionality is a way in which we understand our experience and our relationships with social structures, and the way we understand how these social structures determine our health status and other outcomes. And that's what I'm going to be talking about next week. Stay tuned, as they say. Next slide, please. So this brings us to the end of my presentation. I just want to say, though, as my closing thoughts on this, I think about this as I go through it. For those of you who have someone in your life experiencing the dementia journey, and maybe you yourself are, everyone knows this journey can be hard, and it can be very difficult, and it can be very scary and painful. But I've also found this journey to be very beautiful. And I found this journey to be very gentle and very inspiring and very calming. For me, it's offered moments of self-reflection, and it's offered moments of sweet memories from before and memories of the present. And for me, from what I've seen and I've experienced, it's really spoken to the ability of the human spirit to be resilient, to be strong, and to be transformative, and especially for the human spirit to be kind. And so I want those to be my closing words, that dementia is not always the end for people and families, but in a lot of ways, it can also be the beginning. Thank you very much for your attention. I can take some questions and comments as we close out.
Thank you, Ngozi. I mean, it's so nice to hear your personal story and so inspiring. So much to absorb, so much work to be done as we move forward. The issues about health equity is just, there's so many bridges that we have to cross, but we're so inspired by your presentation today, and we really look forward to your next presentation.
Thank you.
There is, I guess, I just have one sort of a comment, the importance of collecting race-based data. I'm glad you brought it up, because that's always missed out, and how important it is for our research as we continue our work. And one of the questions, just one question that I'm going to go is, what steps do we take to remove stigma from ethnocultural seniors in our communities?
I think for me, like from my own personal experience, I normalized it with my family, my extended family. Like I said, listen, I said, my dad has dementia. No, he's fine. I said, no, he has dementia. To my aunt who called me and said, no, you can't put him in a home. I said, okay, auntie. I said, should I put you down for Tuesdays and Wednesdays from 6 to 9? Is that where you're going to be coming over and taking care of my dad with us? Is that, what schedule do you want to have done? Because to me, there's nothing to be ashamed of. There's absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. While it's not normal to have to have dementia as you age, it is part of the human condition sometimes that people are going to get sick. Part of being human means that we're not always going to be healthy all the time. And so keeping that in mind, I try to find ways to best normalize this experience and make it less scary. So for me, I offer a lot of services to my family. I talk to them, I make myself available, I walk them through the process, I include them in doctor's visits and what the doctor says and what have you, to make the experience seem more real, less scary, and just it's a part of life in a lot of respects. At the community level, when you have community outreach, again, something that's culturally appropriate, culturally relevant, and not necessarily so scary. So coming in guns blazing, you have dementia, you have Alzheimer's, it can jar people and just make people shut down. But if there's a way you attend to it that's very respectful of the community and the culture, people may have a little bit more receptivity to it. That's what I found.
Okay, thank you, Ngozi. So I would really like to thank everybody for coming today to join us for this discussion. It's a really important topic. Thank you, Ngozi. I also wanted to close by saying, by coming together today, hopefully joining us for the next webinars, this will be our first step to generate ideas for systems change, very much needed, increase our advocacy efforts and policy recommendations, which are beneficial for ethnocultural seniors who have dementia, and well as their caregivers. We have to look after our caregivers. It's so important. We also want to look at how mainstream organizations can improve and learn from us, like we learn from the diverse communities in order to provide more equitable and culturally responsive dementia services. So again, thank you, Ngozi. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I want to thank our funders, Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation, Ontario Trillium Foundation, and New Horizons for Seniors. If you have any questions, go to our website, which will be posted pretty soon, and connect with me through email, and we'll have your questions directed to Ngozi so that she can answer them. Thank you once again. Looking forward to seeing you next
Thank you,
Tuesday.
everyone.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.